Lord of the Mysteries, A Time Traveler in the Fourth Age by Kai Yun-ji. Chapter 219-234. Hermit. The angel looked at the elf and the holy emblem in the projection, a faint smile playing on his lips. When did he realize that power and influence didn't matter at all? Probably when he laid the foundation for becoming a god. Hermit. For some unknown reason, when the members of the Tarot Club heard this title, they couldn't help but glance at Mr. Fool. Even Fool Klein hadn't expected the angel to use a tarot card, codenamed to refer to the other party, and upon hearing Hermit, he immediately thought of the Hidden Sage. But was that possible? The Hidden Sage was undoubtedly an evil god, while this elf god was on par with the 6 gods. There was no reason for the other 6 gods to be righteous gods while this one alone became an evil god, right? Angel, are you able to identify this being? Alger also quickly thought of the Hidden Sage. He tried a process of elimination. The Storm Church and the elves had always had a bad relationship, so the Lord of Storms and this Hermit must also have a very bad relationship. The Storm Church and the Moses Ascetic Order also had an average relationship, so it wasn't impossible. But didn't the Hidden Sage suddenly come back to life? If I had to choose the most appropriate tarot card for the symbolism of that emblem, it could only be the Hermit card. And according to the history I know, people of the 4th epoch, like us, were familiar with the 7 gods of the North Continent. Shah-Ir thought about the great beings who were still around today, all of them old acquaintances. In the 5th epoch, a millennium had passed, and only Huang Dao Rosal Gustav had ascended to godhood. Isn't that normal? Furs asked, puzzled. These righteous gods worshipped on the North Continent were very famous in the 4th epoch, isn't that normal? There's still a difference. For example, the true Creator's faith was once the orthodox faith of the entire North Continent in the 4th epoch. Nowadays, most of the 4th epoch history that ordinary people can learn about has been whitewashed by the 7 churches and the 4 royal families. Aside from the family histories of various Beander nobles, those early established secret organizations also possess some true history. Beyond that, it's very difficult to access the secrets of that era. History has buried too many things, for the sake of governance. Shah-Ir's tone was somewhat emotion. When he looked through history books and found that the records were even more blank and brief than the 4th epoch brief history he knew before he transmigrated, he really felt like laughing. The history of the 4th epoch was incomplete, the history of the 3rd epoch only had a great cataclysm, and the history of the 2nd epoch only had some rough creation myths. The spread of information and knowledge in this world was truly, no wonder the Hidden Sage was not well regarded. Looking back at history, everything before the 5th epoch was a previous dynasty. If this Hermit was once a mainstream deity worshipped on the North Continent, it's impossible for him to have disappeared so completely. His former church, could it be the Moses Ascetic Order? The Moses Ascetic Order was indeed the earliest church in the 4th epoch. In its early days, the Moses Ascetic Order's relationship with various churches seemed to be quite good. Alger knew that the angel might possess some history of the 4th epoch, but he couldn't ask about such things. He could only guess and then make judgments based on the angel's reactions. Alger now even suspected that the Hidden Sage's predecessor was this Hermit, but later, this Hermit might have gone mad, for some reason, thus degenerating into an evil god. Even gods can go mad. Alger's emotions were somewhat difficult to suppress, and he greatly hoped that Mr. Fool could offer some guidance. Gods don't necessarily need churches that much. The Moses Ascetic Order should have worshipped the Hermit in its early days, but later, they might have been abandoned by the god. Shah-Ir said, deep in thought. He felt there was no problem saying this. The Moses Ascetic Order never changing its name was very obvious, it was just a concubine. The angel's words were like a huge stone thrown into a calm lake. Even Furs, a shallow believer with not much faith, couldn't help but feel a sense of terror at this moment. A god abandoning its own church. Was this the end of the world? Audrey imagined the Evernight goddess abandoning the night church and couldn't help but shiver. This was an angle they had never considered, including pre-modern Klein. If this were truly the case, whether the hermit was mad or not, the Moses ascetic order certainly was. The one most hurt on the scene was Little Sun, because the city of Silver was suspected to have been abandoned by their creator. How could a god abandon its own church? Audrey couldn't help but retort. Although she knew that a god truly could if it wanted to, the church had always been helping the god spread its faith, so the god had no reason to do so. Who knows, perhaps it's because of different beloved races. At least now, Shah-Ir had no feelings for the Moses ascetic order. His goodwill towards the night church, where he clocked in and received his salary for a long time, even surpassed that for the Moses ascetic order, which he might have toyed with. After all, it was just a concubine. Elf. Audrey somewhat understood. The beloved race of this elf god must be elves. Abandoning the human-dominated Moses ascetic order didn't seem that difficult to understand. I know that the Earth Mother Church also controls part of the storm pathway. Beyonders of the storm pathway can also be seen in the Phaenopotter Kingdom's navy. Alger added, looking at the hermit on the mural, who was closer to the Earth Mother. Just from the positioning, one could intuitively see the distance. These matters are too far removed from us. Many things cannot be understood without reaching a certain sequence. The angel shook his head, looking at Mr. Fool, who didn't even bother to respond to them. Didn't he just think that discussing such high-level matters with them was meaningless? Guessing for a long time was also futile. Mr. Fool was just watching the show. The angel's interruption also made everyone realize Mr. Fool's indifference. Audrey, who was incredibly curious, and Alger, whose heart was somewhat fervent, felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over them. Yes, Mr. Fool's reaction had already proven everything. Their discussion also lacked some empirical evidence. Mr. Fool, here are 3 pages of Rosal's diary. Audrey began to hand over Rosal's diary, which was good. The fool nodded in satisfaction. This awkward situation was finally coming to an end. It wasn't that he didn't want to interject or provide guidance, but that he simply knew nothing. It would have been fine if the members of the Tarot Club understood nothing, but there happened to be an angel who seemed to know a little. The fool looked at the diary. August 8th, I attended His Majesty the King's banquet for the first time. It was, the food was truly extravagant. The nobles in this world are more hygienic than those in the medieval period on Earth. They bathe quite frequently. It seems they've learned their lesson from too many mistakes, worried that a meander of a certain sequence might spread plague through bad habits. But what's the use? Commoners are still unhygienic, and the slums are unbearable to look at. Don't these nobles and beyonders feel disgusted? They don't seem to go to the slums either. Damn it, they really don't go even once. 2 worlds in every aspect. How can they tolerate a stench next to their beds in a city? Chapter 219, Cheeks Chest Pains from Anger. November 10th, I am about to advance to Sequence 4, entering the realm of demigods. I have 2 choices, either Alchemist of the Savant pathway, or Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior pathway. Although I feel that the Hidden Sage's status is slightly lower, not a true god, it is still far more dangerous than the god of steam and machinery. I should stick to my own pathway's advancement direction. After becoming an alchemist, I can also inject souls into the items I create. Of course, I won't be extracting my own life force. At most, I'll be making some negligible contributions to global desertification. Sometimes I even suspect that the large desert in the northwest of the Intis Kingdom was created by alchemists, or those from other similar pathways, but I have no evidence. The Artisan Pathways Sequence 4 seems quite fun, Klein thought, while also anticipating what special abilities the Seer Pathways Sequence 4 would have and what tricks it could pull. April 26th, I still can't forget the Twilight Palace in the Faesak Empire. It truly was a miracle of civilization. I heard it was once the residence of the giant King Ormir. When Zeratul came, I curiously asked him a question: can angels resurrect the dead? He told me that it requires a plea for a miracle. Hey, why didn't he say a divine miracle? Is this his hint that he possesses the ability to resurrect? Resurrection. Klein glanced at the surrounding gray fog, and the more he looked, the more he felt that this place was related to the seer pathway's uniqueness. His ability to resurrect must also be connected to this place. Klein quickly finished reading the diary's contents. After the Tarot Club members completed their routine transactions, the Tarot Club concluded. The impending Backland Great Smog incident seemed to be nothing to be nervous about. It was like a common cold, with more benefits than drawbacks overall. Shah-Ir could already foresee how dazzling the sun would be a few days later. Fourth epic. The primordial demoness Cheek, being incredibly capable, stole the ancestor of the Zoroaster family after a chaotic battle. Cheek was, after all, a king of angels of the demoness pathway, exceptionally skilled at ambushing others. The authority of the apocalypse, following the demoness's curse, fell upon Zarathustra's fate. Coupled with the hermit's covert assistance, it directly took out the sequence one worm of time, who was already in a poor state. Solomon, who received the distress signal temporarily, couldn't save him and could only choose to retrieve this sequence one Beander characteristic. However, he was very unlucky. After all, he was still one step away from truly becoming a god, and the demoness was determined to take this Beander characteristic. Both sides were kings of angels who had accommodated uniqueness, and neither could do anything to the other. Moreover, the Solomon family had more enemies, so in the end, Solomon could only watch as the demoness left through the mirror world. This was originally a blow to his prestige, but with the fall of old Zarathustra, the Zoroaster family had even less confidence to switch allegiances. They still obediently followed the Solomon family, accepting their protection. Within the mirror world, in the demoness divine kingdom, Shah-Ir saw that sequence one worm of time Beander characteristic. It was shaped like a crystal pillar formed by light and shadow, with many worms of time, each having 12 segments, rapidly swimming inside. At that moment, Shah-Ir had thought about throwing this thing into the gray fog space. What if some subtle mystical reaction occurred, and the celestial worthy revived himself? The story of the world of mysteries might then conclude early, and the outer gods, who were eyeing Earth from beyond, would no longer be a threat. As a loyal subordinate, he would most likely be fine, right? Instead of turning him into a marionette or a clone, wouldn't it be better for the celestial worthy to feed him into a small god, and then discuss God Almighty? This idea was so tempting. If it weren't for the slight agitation from the chaos sea pollution within him, Shah-Ir would have truly been stirred. After all, he only wanted to be a mystery prior. Who became the lord of the mysteries didn't matter. Whether it was Joe Mingrui or the celestial worthy, there seemed to be no difference. In any case, high-sequence Beyonders would be affected by their respective pathways. The error pathway was more playful, the door pathway liked to run, and the fool pathway was more interested in history. The three pathways couldn't produce a single well-behaved person. Shah-Ir checked and confirmed that the Beander characteristic was fine. He then put away the Beander characteristic and turned to leave, not caring at all about the demoness Cheek beside him who wanted to gender bend him again. He actually ignored me. Are you stupid from the chaos sea pollution? Cheek couldn't help but be surprised. This was a charm of authority, and since he had come, wasn't he planning to do something? With her current alluring appearance, even she herself couldn't resist a little. Could he resist? How about the witch church developing in your kingdom? Cheek realized that Shah-Ir was genuinely uninterested and quickly stopped him as he was about to leave. She didn't want Shah-Ir to jump pathways so soon. What if he really had the ability to suppress the increasingly severe pollution on him? What about her unperformed ritual to become a god? She couldn't possibly truly come into contact with the chaos sea beneath the ground. The outcome goes without saying. Just look at this poor elf in front of her, so polluted that even a demoness among demonesses didn't want to sleep with him. Not familiar. Don't cause trouble in my territory, or I'll beat you. Shah-Ir directly rejected Cheek's idea of establishing a diocese in his territory. There was no special reason. His kingdom already had the Church of the Earth Mother. Who knew what would happen if the Church of the Earth Mother, which advocated procreation, got along with the witch church? He didn't really want to know, nor did he want the image of the elf race to be affected. What did you say? Cheek looked at the arrogant Sequence 2 in front of her, almost, no. Lady Cheek was already laughing with anger. Not familiar. Not allowing her to establish a diocese in the Constant Kingdom, and even wanting to beat her. Is this guy so tough now? Elves all like to reason with their fists, do they? Cheek really wanted to give Sha'ir a good beating right now, but she couldn't. This elf was too weak, only Sequence 2, yet he was acting as if he had eaten gunpowder. From the looks of it, he would definitely fight back, and fighting back would involve the Chaos Sea, making the problem complicated. This guy was so punchable, but she couldn't actually punch him. Cheek's chest hurt from anger. Boring. Sha'ir's figure faded, intending to leave by traversing through dreams, but the surrounding mirrors shifted, causing the demoness to interrupt his teleportation. Who? Cheek took a deep breath. She gracefully walked towards Sha'ir, each step carrying a unique rhythm. The fragrance on her body was like a mix of roses and jasmine. Her buttons slowly unfastened, revealing her delicate collarbone, and as her skirt swayed, it seemed to whisper endless temptation. The demoness chuckled lightly, her eyes and brows exuding charm. Even if she couldn't directly attack, the demoness's allure was still conceptual, and even a Sequence 0 true god would inevitably be affected. At this moment, she was as beautiful as a national jade seal. Chapter 220, The Authority of Chaos. Such a beautiful demoness would captivate even a god almighty. Sha'ir revealed a sincere smile. Under Cheek's triumphant gaze, he reached out to touch the demoness's steel. He clenched his 5 fingers. He completely used the Worm of Time characteristic in his other hand as a sealed artifact. The triumph in Cheek's eyes faded. She could feel that hand very close to her skin, but she wasn't interested in the beautiful woman so near. Instead, he was fixated on something even more precious to her. Don't go too far. Cheek was a little annoyed, but when she saw those eyes glowing with chaotic light, her voice involuntarily softened. She wondered to herself, how could she, a dignified king of angels, argue with a lunatic? Moreover, Cheek had more or less guessed some of the elf's thoughts, and she was also a little curious. Cheek did not resist. At most, she was a king of angels, and Sequence 1 level stealing was sufficient. After a period of experimentation, Sha'ir successfully stole one of the demoness's most core authorities, the authority of chaos. This was a higher level authority than the Doomsday Authority, capable of returning all things to chaos and restoring them to the primordial one. It was a branch of the symbol of destruction and ending, a different method of ending than death, eternal darkness, decay, downfall, slaughter, and shattering. This was an authority that only a king of angels who had accommodated the demoness's uniqueness could initially access. The authority of chaos, but it was not complete yet. Its inherent meaning was not great, it was more of a symbol. A demoness who wields chaos. Sha'ir smiled. When he successfully stole the chaos authority, the pollution within him, which he had previously been unable to control and could only passively guide through erosion, seemed to become a little more obedient at that moment. The chaos authority was like a type of permission. Even if this permission's priority in the Chaos Sea was only average, permission was still permission. In the right hands, it was absolutely invaluable. I really like this gift. As a return gift, I can tell you the substitute ritual for advancing to Sequence 0 Primordial 1, Chaos Demoness. That is to find a way to borrow special characteristics from the 5 Sequence 1s of the 5 pathways related to the Chaos Sea, combine them into a power almost like the Chaos Sea, and master it. Sha'ir nodded with a smile at Cheek in front of him. This time, his figure transformed into a bolt of lightning and disappeared, with thunder rumbling and immense power. Even a king of angels level demoness found it difficult to stop him. Only the elf's last words echoed in the mirror world. Lend me your authority to play with. I'll see how I can return a special gift to you. After the elf left, Cheek, who had been almost expressionless, now realized that the other party seemed to have known about this substitute ritual all along. Helping her accommodate the uniqueness and acquiring the Worm of Time characteristic seemed to have this very purpose. But it also seemed to require approval and support, because this substitute ritual sounded completely feasible. Cheek was already a demoness who had accommodated the uniqueness. At her level, for such a high-level mystical ritual, her spiritual intuition could often provide a rough feedback on whether it was truly effective. If Cheek didn't cooperate, Sha'ir wouldn't be able to deepen his understanding and knowledge of the Chaos Sea's pollution through the authority of chaos, and Cheek herself wouldn't be able to use this substitute ritual. The ritual required borrowing special characteristics from 5 sequence ones of the all 5 families. Does that mean borrowing a bit of essence from 4 true gods and 1 king of angels, and then combining it into a power similar to the Chaos Sea? The price for this substitute ritual's higher safety was greater difficulty. Cheek herself knew that she couldn't refuse Sha'ir. What would it matter if she lent him her authority to play with? Sha'ir was not a true worm of time, after all. Even a true sequence 1-foot worm of time, such a theft would have a time limit, as it was the core authority of a king of angels who had accommodated the uniqueness. Cheek could fully retrieve her authority if she wanted to, it would just take some time. But how does he know so much? The demoness frowned. This feeling was not like the storm pathway, instead, it was more like the White Tauren pathway. This elf with mixed characteristics is truly unreasonable. Constan Kingdom. In the palace hall, thunder rumbled as Sha'ir returned openly. Erodes, who was currently occupying the body of a warrior pathway demigod, quickly walked over. Erodes could sense Sha'ir's current state, and even vaguely sense his mood. Erodes, you are always a bit inferior to the first and second blasphemy slates. In the future, it might not be impossible to make up for this gap. Sha'ir's hand showed Erodes's true form, which was that uniquely shaped mirror, with obsidian embedded in it like eyes. Erodes's birth was related to the Chaos Sea, but it only had the ability to attract Chaos Sea pollution, not the authority to manipulate or guide it. Otherwise, it would have been fought over long ago, and Sha'ir wouldn't have had to go through such trouble to find a solution himself. Your Majesty, this is my honor. Erodes remembered to use his title when working, and immediately offered a string of flattery to express his respect. Perhaps it's time for me to die. As long as I die for a worthy cause. Sha'ir closed his eyes. On the surface of the silver mirror, an identical reflection appeared. Everyone had their own mirror self, but unlike the demoness, this was only a temporary projection without a strong spiritual imprint. After leaving the mirror's reflection, the mirror self would dissipate. As an angel of the mixed storm, spectator, and White Tauren pathways, Sha'ir could also perform some general abilities based on mystical principles, rather than being limited by professional barriers. The warrior body controlled by Erodes stopped moving. Its main consciousness began to focus on its true form, preparing to cooperate with Sha'ir at any time. When Sha'ir used the Worm of Time characteristic to perform a mystical ritual, temporarily isolating, or rather, temporarily transferring his connection with the gray fog, without the gray fog's influence, the unrestrained Chaos Sea pollution within him began to affect the elf's will. The enactment begins. Through the Spectator Sequence 3 ability, Sha'ir split off an identity that carried his connection with the gray fog. This virtual personality, with the help of the Worm of Time characteristic, assisted Sha'ir in stealing some anchors of stable humanity, as well as some awakened will of God Almighty. A part of Sha'ir's spirit, will, and spirituality, carrying a small amount of anchors and a slightly larger amount of God Almighty's awakened will, entered the projection in the mirror. The mirror self in the projection opened its eyes, with intense divinity within them. It was only due to the presence of some anchors that the underlying, Sha'ir, color had not faded. Erodes, relying on its connection with the Chaos Sea, drew a projection of the Chaos Sea into the mirror. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 221, Practicing Dharma, Discussing Tao, Learning from Heaven and Earth. Erodes, relying on his connection with the Chaos Sea, pulled a projection of the Chaos Sea into the mirror. It was an immeasurable, boundless sea of indescribable color, seemingly containing all secrets, embracing all colors and all possibilities. No matter what kind of Beyander, if they haven't reached a certain level, they would almost certainly die in such an environment. Ordinary Beyonders wouldn't even be qualified to become a vessel for the primordial God Almighty's revival. They would simply be corrupted into a monster with shattered spirit and flesh the moment they made contact. But this mirror Sha'ir, dominated by divinity, after overcoming its initial discomfort, as the primordial God Almighty's consciousness within it became increasingly active, it actually began to adapt to this environment full of pollution. Not only that, because the person in the mirror had no Beyander characteristic and lacked sufficient power, it instinctively began to try and manipulate the Chaos Sea's pollution. This was almost inevitable. The Chaos Sea's pollution would stimulate the revival of the Great Consciousness, and the revival of the Great Consciousness would enhance its adaptability to the Chaos Sea's pollution. This was a positive, virtuous cycle. Sha'ir essentially split off a virtual personality, 40% humanity and 60% divinity, and threw it into a polluted environment to be catalyzed. Because the worm of time characteristic could steal anchors, it was used to better regulate the number and stability of anchors, thereby clearing the way for the revival of the Great Consciousness, but also imposing certain restrictions to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control too quickly. Before the person in the mirror went mad, Sha'ir wouldn't go mad. The mirror world was instead the main battlefield for the struggle of consciousness. And the person in the mirror, without Beyander characteristics, even with restrictions on the revival of the Great Consciousness, its divinity would still instinctively resist and instinctively acquire power. The closest and best source of power, of course, was the projected pollution of the Chaos Sea surrounding it. The mirror Sha'ir, dominated by divinity, began to use the power of the Chaos Sea to resist the external Sha'ir's constraints and interference. The external Sha'ir and the internal person in the mirror gazed calmly at each other. He closed his eyes, manipulating his spirituality, and clashed with the revived, Great Consciousness, in the internal battlefield of the mirror. The revived consciousness had a natural affinity for the Chaos Sea, and Sha'ir also had the Chaos authority from the demoness. This was a spiritual confrontation. Initiated and provoked by Sha'ir, in Erode's mirror world, within the projected body of the person in the mirror, humanity and divinity, without Beyander characteristics, began to contend, relying on the power of the surrounding Chaos Sea's pollution. The divine side had a higher chaos affinity, and many operations were almost instinctive. Humanity was far from having such a natural affinity. It could only rely on the authority of chaos and accumulated knowledge from the past, in this battle of Dharma, to refine its practical experience and theoretical foundation by discussing the Tao with the divine side. Although the human side could not be as at ease as the divine side, this was, after all, the chaos authority originating from a king of angels. If this were on the West continent, perhaps there would be a suitable term, learning from heaven and earth. Erodes watched this battle of Dharma within himself, almost dumbfounded. The lick dog mirror could see outside the mirror, where the virtual personality, holding the worm of time characteristic, placed a hand on the shoulder of the meditating Sha'ir, seemingly observing everything, ready to cooperate with Sha'ir, to steal his humanity and anchors, supplying them to the human side in the mirror battlefield. If the divine side in the mirror was about to win, then the angel outside the mirror could kill its mirror self. This was as simple as cutting off a negative personality. Although the angel's wear and tear would increase, what did it matter? He didn't care about being scrapped. If even the angel outside the mirror was inevitably affected by certain factors, then the hermit could also kill the angel. Erode's mirror world was one layer of isolation, and the elf cataclysm was the second layer of isolation. If even this could cause the hidden hermit to suffer a major setback, then he should watch carefully, learn well, remember this lesson, and grow wiser from the experience. Sha'ir completely ignored everything happening outside. He was immersed in this discussion of the Tao with the God Almighty's consciousness. Although God Almighty wasn't even awake, at most, it was some instinctive reaction or neural reflex. Sha'ir was like fighting with a scorpion's severed tail stinger, but this was still an incredibly valuable treasure. King Constan's absence did not affect the struggles of the era of conflict. The Constan kingdom, after all, was a legitimate feudal lord, supported by a true God Almighty's church, and the number of various beyonders who pledged allegiance was not small. On the front lines, Sauron and Einhorn, two hunters, were enough to lead the kingdom's legions to be active on the battlefield. It was simply that without a king of angels-level king, its prestige was not as great as the Solomon kingdom. A major event happened on the North Continent afterward. Solomon successfully crossed that line and advanced to become a Black Emperor. This seemed to be a matter of course. After all, this was the miraculous fourth epoch. Whether it was changing pathways to become a God Almighty or becoming a God Almighty without fully digesting a sequence 1 Beander potion, it could happen. A normal advancement to Black Emperor was naturally not a problem. War was the best way to unite a nation's strength. During this long period of conflict, the name of the Solomon family became increasingly prominent on the North Continent. After the Black Emperor became a God Almighty, the advantages of a reality-side true God Almighty began to show, coupled with the colossal true God Almighty, the fallen God true Creator who still had control over the Chaos Sea. The Solomon Kingdom was directly elevated to the Solomon Empire. The Black Emperor's faction began to expand rapidly, directly encompassing most of the eastern North Continent. Forces like the Storm Church were suppressed to some extent, and their divine kingdoms on Earth were moved to relatively barren areas. After the East was settled, it was time for the West. Former strategic allies had now become obstacles that had to be cleared for the westward advance. The funny thing was, because the Black Emperor and the Fallen Gods factions were somewhat overbearing. Apart from the Storm Church, which was fundamentally at odds with the Constan Kingdom, and the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom, which the Constan Kingdom had previously actively provoked, the God of War Church, the Night Church, and even the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, which was backstabbed by the Black Emperor, subtly supported the Constan Kingdom. They weren't supporting the Constan Kingdom, they were simply resisting the Solomon Empire. If there wasn't such a resilient feudal lord, there would be no choice but with such a feudal lord. The Black Emperor, who was about to unify the entire North Continent in one go, was once again greatly disgusted by the reactions of the gods. Fight, or not fight? That was the question. The spirited Solomon chose to continue fighting. But in terms of mid-level power, the Constan Kingdom, besides the forces of the Church of the Earth Mother, also had elves, some sanguine, and a large number of Beander families who had pledged allegiance. Relying solely on the Solomon family, it was difficult to achieve an absolute advantage in the number of angels. Solomon directly involved the fallen god, and so Red Angel Medici, the king of angels of the Hunter pathway, led troops, but his army was struck by a plague halfway. Chapter 222, Hermit and Keeping Up with the Times. The Solomon Empire's attempt to conquer the Constan Kingdom was not going smoothly. Years of warfare had successfully elevated Sauron and Einhorn to weather warlocks, sequence 2 angels of the Hunter pathway. The Black Emperor's patience was steadily eroded by continuous failures. He had not expected the demonists to side with the Constan Kingdom. This seemed understandable. Both sides were already in opposition regarding the Zoroaster family, and it was natural for Demonist Cheek to be inherently opposed to Red Angel Medici. While the Black Emperor was contemplating whether to personally intervene or negotiate with the Earth Mother, in the Constan Kingdom's royal palace, Sha'ir's performance had reached its limit. The clash between the two consciousnesses within Mirror Sha'ir had reached a point where a victor had to be decided. Further stimulating the resurrected God Almighty's consciousness would make the risks far outweigh the benefits. Every minute of delay would be a net loss. In the main hall, the hermit's figure appeared silently. He casually took the Worm of Time Beander characteristic from the virtual personality's hand, and the virtual personality immediately returned to the Calamity Elf. In the mirror, the man in the mirror opened its eyes, and the suddenly bright golden ocean was reflected in its indifferent pupils. The numbers pulsating in the hermit's hand formed an illusory sun. The conceptualized sun seemed to come alive, directly purifying the spiritual imprint of the great existence within the man in the mirror. The symbol of no darkness did not even spare the spiritual imprint of the elf's human side, purifying the entire man in the mirror into an empty shell, transforming it into a pure projection in the mirror. Erodes. The hermit called Erodes's name, and the mirror understood. The mirror world began to compress, becoming a square of moderate size. The conceptual sun in the hermit's hand disintegrated, and streams of information then recombined to form the conceptual authority of chaos. In conjunction with Erodes, the pollution from the chaos sea that had been drawn in earlier was gathered into this compressed mirror space. The moment this chaos sea pollution gathered, the hermit did not touch it. Instead, he used the stealing authority to steal the mirror world, which contained the chaos sea pollution, and then sacrificed it to the gray mist space. Above the gray mist, even separated by a fragment of the mirror world, Saphira Castle still keenly sensed the aura of the chaos sea. Without the hermit's intervention, the gray-white mist surged, cleansing this chaos sea pollution, which was like water without a source. After the hermit easily dealt with these minor troubles, he absorbed the worm of time, Beander characteristic in his hand, temporarily hurting this sequence 1 Beander characteristic through his self-created advanced magic. Your most loyal servant offers his knees to you, master. Erodes was utterly impressed, directly manipulating the body he had been playing with to perform a grand bow. He had been wondering how Shah-Ir would resolve the lingering chaos sea pollution, and he hadn't expected it to be so simple. It turned out that there was no need to come into contact with the chaos sea, one only needed to cut off and discard the areas covered by the chaos sea pollution. A mirror world, being conceptual, could have a piece cut off without causing any harm to Erodes. The hermit did not reply, but was instead digesting the gains from this performance. For the hermit, knowledge was power. This time, he not only deepened his familiarity with the chaos sea but also, through his debate with the divine consciousness, became proficient in the chaos authority, borrowed from the demoness, perfecting his understanding and knowledge of the concept of chaos. After this battle, he could activate the hermit's chaos authority through his own cognitive understanding of chaos, endowing abstract knowledge with substantial power, which was itself the core authority of the hermit. Without the assistance of the worm of time Beander characteristic, the chaos authority stolen by the calamity elf disappeared, returning to its original owner, but Shah-Ir had no attachment to it. Hey. So, it's not that a sequence 1 great angel gaining authority over a Saphira makes them a king of angels among kings of angels. Rather, as long as one's control over a Saphira reaches a certain level, they are naturally a king of angels among kings of angels. Their sequence merely lowers the difficulty or threshold. After experiencing it firsthand, the hermit had new insights. Sequence 1 plus Saphira Castle, king of angels among kings of angels. Sequence 2 plus Saphira Castle, king of angels. This general standard was originally given by the fool Klein. Now that he thought about it, both statements were not wrong. After all, Klein himself didn't seem to have strengthened his control over Saphira Castle much. He merely instinctively leveraged the power of the gray mist space as his sequence advanced, relying on the celestial worthies arrangements. If that's the case, some burdens are unnecessary. The hermit placed his hand on the calamity elf's shoulder. This body, which he had used for a long time, quickly decomposed into pure information, a dark blue Beander characteristic with dark light inside, and various other colors and Beander characteristics from other pathways, all precipitated and fell to the ground. At this point in time, he should be the most outstanding craftsman of the current era. With a wave of his hand, the hermit pulverized all these precipitated Beander characteristics. The pollution originating from the elf was purified by the hermit. The more stubborn parts, those related to the chaos sea, were sacrificed to the gray mist space. He referenced the style of the profane cards, using all the decomposed information of the elf, his own understanding of chaos authority, the entire storm pathways information, and that calamity Beander characteristic of the storm pathways sequence 2, to craft a tyrant card with extremely low negative effects and certain chaos C manipulation authority, using the abilities of the hermit and a craftsman. As a deity hurting the paragon pathways sequence 1, the mystical item crafted by the hermit himself naturally had negative effects within a controllable range. The profane card's own chaos C manipulation authority was not high, it could only be considered a game controller, and the actual manipulation still depended on the user's true skill. If one is to come into contact with a Sephira, high sequence Beander characteristics seem to be a burden. A higher sequence means stronger divinity within the body, and divinity is more susceptible to the stimulation and infection of a Sephira. But if the sequence is too low, it means the Beander's standing is too low, and a low standing doesn't even qualify one to know about a Sephira. So, I can compromise. The hermit explained to Rhodes, separating a set of pure information, unmixed with Beander characteristics, to form a brand new elf body. The only grace was that he endowed it with the ability to house the customized profane cards. Since I've given up the storm pathway, is my current system more concise? The hermit raised his hand and tapped Rhodes's mirror surface, chuckling softly. Chapter 223, Picking a soft target first. The current body of the elf is pure, unadulterated by any Beander characteristic, at most a clean body with a slight blessing. Hermit, abandoning the storm pathway means that hermit can maintain a healthier connection with Sha'ir, and for Sha'ir, who is a sequence 1 spectator, multi-consciousness and multi-threaded operations are as simple as eating and drinking. When the elf received the profane cards specially crafted by hermit, and integrated them into his body, the elf's actual Beander characteristic naturally improved. Conservatively estimated, it was at least at the level of a sequence 2 angel, but the elf's own spirituality couldn't power this profane cards. This touches upon the core of this system, isn't abandoning Beander characteristics precisely for the purpose of contacting the Chaos Sea. The greatest advantage of pollution is that it can cross time and space to pollute through mystical connections. The elf held Rhodes and easily, through experience, borrowed the power of the Chaos Sea. His Beander characteristic was certainly sufficient, and this special body, also strengthened by the special profane cards due to Hermit's blessing. Originally, his own spiritual, small battery, couldn't supply the profane cards, a sealed artifact of grade 0, with high intensity. Now, connected to the external power source of Chaos Sea pollution, the elf is a fully functional sequence 2 angel. It's not impossible to occasionally unleash the combat power of an angel king of kings. But this is like those Tao harmonizers on the West continent, their spirit and flesh are eroded by the Sephira, which accelerates wear and tear, and their lifespan rarely exceeds 300 years. But it doesn't matter. I originally intended to use the Avatar's life to nurture that profane cards. In the West continent's terms, it could also be called a natal talisman. Hermit calculated that even considering safety, 100 years for one avatar to be scrapped would still be a profit for him. Although the pollution from the Chaos Sea would also seep through and erode him while eroding the avatar, this was controllable in Hermit's eyes. As long as it didn't exceed certain limits, he could even utilize this power. Rhodes silently witnessed all of this. It felt a sense of pillar and dominance from the elf in front of it. The last one to give it this feeling was the ancient sun god. This was a unique characteristic that only those truly possessing a certain Sephira, and a pillar-level Sephira, would have. As for Hermit, Rhodes had long been unable to see through him. It was already good enough for it to see through the secrets of an angel. Asking it to see through a true god's concealment authority. That's a bit too much to ask. Master, what shall we do next? Will you still operate in the shadows? Whether Hermit was floating or not, Rhodes was already a bit giddy. It knew that Hermit could resurrect by backing up his own information. After the main body died, the activated backup information would automatically resurrect, and he also had super strong concealment authority. What was there to fear? Hermit did not correct Rhodes's address. The term master itself varies in Eastern and Western cultures, as well as in various contexts. Here, master is more of a title derived from Rhodes acting as a butler, rather than implying servitude. Hermit thought for a moment, then chuckled and said, "We no longer need to hide. Even if the gods notice my avatar, they will only speculate that I was long ago polluted by the Chaos Sea, and even after becoming a god, I couldn't escape it. I could only use some method to strip away the polluted destiny, creating a second personality, or rather, a clone. In the eyes of the gods, I might still be a pitiable person struggling with all my might, only for self-salvation. With the example of Dark Angel Sorcerer before us, this is not such an astonishing thing, we have not achieved any groundbreaking feats." Rhodes was overjoyed at the news. No need to hide, this was a good thing. After nearly 100 years of lying low, it was finally their time to show off. When Hermit emerges, there should be fireworks. Hermit's surrounding information fluctuated rapidly, and he conjured a Chichao version of the Lord of the Stars symbol on the spot. Parts of this symbol were composed of the astrological knowledge Hermit possessed, and other parts were composed of mystical knowledge related to the outer deity, the supernova dominator, such as his honorific name, mythical creature form, and Beander pathway. The astral world suddenly lit up, and one star after another emerged, dense and dazzling. Almost all living beings in the entire world noticed this scene, stars shining in broad daylight, their brilliance no less than the scorching sun. In the Solomon Empire, the Black Emperor, seated on the Iron Throne, suddenly looked up at the sky. That was a divine power, a brand new, unfamiliar divine power, and its source seemed to be the West. Constant. The Black Emperor's tone was somewhat complex, but quickly returned to calm. In the Earth Mother's divine kingdom on Earth, Earth Mother Lilith saw the place where the stars converged and shone. She was surprised for a moment, then a smile appeared on her face. Hermit's aura spread out as invisible ripples. The higher the sequence, the more sensitive one was to spirituality, and the clearer the perception. Sauron and Einhorn, these two newly promoted angels, looked blankly in the direction of the palace. This aura felt somewhat familiar. Aren't we all sequenced too? In a luxurious building in a border city of the Constant Kingdom, Cheek, who was looking in the mirror, accidentally crushed the mirror in her hand. She looked incredulously in the direction of the royal city. This scoundrel actually became a god. And a step faster than her. How was she going to control him then? At this moment, gazes from all over the world turned towards the palace where Hermit was located. These gods had to take seriously the birth of a peer. And in response to the gods' gazes, Hermit's reply was also very simple. The starlight scattered by the stars converged into a magnificent pillar of light, heading towards the God of knowledge and wisdom's divine kingdom on earth. The enormous golden pillar of light enveloped the entire space of the divine kingdom on earth, seemingly intending to directly dissolve this ocean of books and reading. After Hermit became a god, the first one he chose to target was, of course, this rather unlucky soft target. Roar. Within the wondrous kingdom composed of open and closed books, where various figures moved through, delighting in reading, an angry dragon's roar echoed. Even the dragon of wisdom, known for his stable temper, felt intense anger in the face of such blatant provocation. A white light shot up into the sky, colliding with the descending golden pillar, stirring up intense energy fluctuations. Dazzling starlight scattered, and a perfect-faced, slender elf appeared above the divine kingdom. He wore a loose white robe, with streams of informational light flowing around his collar, like subtle patterns interwoven within. He met the gaze of the old man holding an illusory book within the divine kingdom. And somewhere else, Elf Queen Gao Exaname, seeing Shah Ire, who had already ascended to godhood, was long unable to recover. Chapter 224, The Hermit and the White Tower. The hermit politely nodded slightly. Before the god of knowledge and wisdom could respond, in the next instant, a stream of information, invisible to most beyonders, directly enveloped the entire divine kingdom on earth. The hermit, after all, could not bear to see the human world plunged into misery, and directly grafted the God of knowledge and wisdom's divine kingdom on earth into the spirit world. The God of knowledge and wisdom, Reborn, did not forcibly stop it. His divine kingdom on earth was surrounded by his believers, and fighting on the ground was not advisable. Considering the hermit's initial appearance and his control over the cosmos, if the hermit wanted to shift the battlefield to the cosmos, Reborn might have resisted. But the spirit world, he could still accept it. Since battle was unavoidable, then the spirit world and the astral world would inevitably have to be chosen as a battlefield. Reborn did not think there was any possibility of a truce. Even the most rational ancient god was still an ancient god. Unless he was willing to directly hand over the last knowledge emperor characteristic, this war was almost inevitable. In the spirit world, Reborn began to attack proactively. As a senior, how could he be intimidated by a mere elf of later generations? Even if the opponent's silent ascension to godhood was somewhat strange, considering the opponent was the hermit, it was not entirely unacceptable. Testing me. The hermit looked at the lightning storm simulated by Reborn. No expression showed on his face. A long spear forged from pure lightning appeared in his hand, and he directly plunged into the divine kingdom before him. All the storms along the way were broken through, failing to form any obstructive effect. The Lord of Storms, LOTM, just watched these two bastards clash, each using the authority of storms in the spirit world. He held the trident in his hand, his face darkening repeatedly. Considering the alliance between the fallen god and the Black Emperor, he ultimately did not act rashly. Reborn held the Book of Illusion, surrounded by a powerful electromagnetic storm, violently destroying all the surrounding information structures. This posed a certain threat to the hermit, who had already transformed into an information state life form. However, the hermit was not entirely informationalized. His speed was as fast as true lightning. The lightning spear in his hand shot out, piercing through the howling electromagnetic storm and Reborn, who was casting spells behind it. Unfortunately, Reborn seemed to have anticipated it, dodging the attack through some means. But in that instant, Reborn felt a strong sense of familiarity. In a trance, he seemed to see that ancient god who had long since fallen. If Reborn's learning and simulation of storms leaned more towards LOTM, because he and LOTM had long coexisted and interacted at the same level, then Sha'ir's mystical reenactment of the storm authority largely originated from the elf king, Sanaeth Solium. Whether it was his elf origin or the memories he experienced from the Dragon of Imagination's negative personality, Sha'ir had a sufficient understanding of these ancient gods' fighting styles. In contrast, he was not at all familiar with the Lord of Storms, LOTM. When the ancient god's fighting style met the true god's fighting style, the more conservative Reborn was directly suppressed by Sha'ir. After the Hermit and the White Tower's contest over the Storm Authority continued for a period, the Hermit had seen enough of this transformation. He transformed into a golden sun, emitting light bright enough to illuminate the entire world. Somewhere on the North Continent, the eternal blazing sun, who had been watching the show earlier, grimaced. Sha'ir indifferently transformed into a sun and pressed forward. If Reborn still used his storm defense, which had pretty much been seen through, then he would suffer a great loss. Simulated authority was, after all, simulated. Once all its variations were seen through, it would crumble with a single blow. Reborn by this point vaguely realized the Hermit's second objective. He also simulated the Beander abilities of the Sun pathway, once again engaging in a struggle with the Hermit. This time, the speed at which both sides changed Beander abilities became faster and faster. Sun, Storm, Visionary, White Tower, Hanged Man, Beander abilities from all 5 pathways of the all 5 families appeared rapidly in their clash. The Hermit recorded the various abilities simulated by the White Tower, while the White Tower analyzed the various mystical knowledge mastered by the Hermit. Both of them tacitly confined the scope to the all 5 families. Even if abilities from other Beander pathways occasionally appeared, they were fleeting. The primary chosen pathways were still the all 5 families. This divine war lasted for 3 months. During these 3 months, the hermit, with Hariburgen's help, thoroughly sorted out most of the all 5 families' Beander knowledge he had mastered. He not only learned a lot of mystical knowledge from the White Tower but also innovated and jointly deduced a lot of new knowledge during their battle. At this point, it was considered a phased conclusion. Shah-Ire and Hariburgen tacitly paused for an instant. Both realized how difficult the other was, especially the Dragon of Wisdom. He had never expected that the hermit's foundation in the all 5 families was not inferior to his own, who had managed the all 5 families for thousands of years. Let's stop with these little tricks. I'll show you something new. The hermit knew that the Dragon of Wisdom would not show him anything more, so he was going to get serious. Hariburgen's eyes narrowed slightly, knowing that the hermit would not let him off easily. But he was also confident that the hermit had no way to deal with him. Both were true gods at sequence 0, and the hermit and the White Tower were, in a sense, similar types of deities. Neither could easily create a significant gap between them. If the spirit world is without a master, for whom is the crown left? Today is uneventful. All spirits and numbers, acknowledge me as your master. The hermit took a step back, and his body completely disintegrated into a stream of information, merging into the vast ocean of information in the spirit world. A vast torrent of information directly enveloped the spirit world space where Hariburgen was located. Everything that was not in an information state was assimilated and disintegrated in this illusory light. The Dragon of Wisdom sensed the danger, but strictly speaking, he was not afraid. Behind this old dragon, brass-colored eyes opened one by one. These omniscient eyes clashed with the hermit's eyes of peeping, and the entire spirit world was greatly affected. Countless spirit world creatures fled to more distant places. Hariburgen also had his pride and could not easily flee. Moreover, strategic retreat was of little significance. Without understanding the opponent's specific objective, no matter where the battlefield was moved, it would not prevent the hermit from communicating with the power of the spirit world. The White Tower's omniscience authority was not affected by the spirit world. Soon, Hariburgen discovered that the opponent's offensive did not match his domineering words. Although this power was strong, it only suppressed him to a certain extent. The opponent was, after all, an ancient god. Hariburgen could accept this difference. But it wasn't long before the old dragon's expression became somewhat grim. Chapter 225, Borrowing Your White Tower for a While. The Dragon of Wisdom, Hariburgen, gradually realized that the pressure he was about to endure was growing. The hermit's simplest combat methods were nothing more than 2 types. One was to infuse information into the target, exploding their brain and draining their Beander characteristic, and the other was to assimilate the opponent, decomposing them into information. The authority of a deity could be countered by another authority. Originally, as a true god of the White Tower pathway, Hariburgen was not overly burdened by the chaotic and disorganized information. Behind him, a towering, illusory White Tower faintly appeared. Each of its layers was composed of thick books, and on each book was a brass-colored omniscient eye. The higher the layer, the darker it became, and the more it was filled with auras of madness, destruction, ill omen, and disaster. The hermit's unfiltered, chaotic torrent of information, drawn directly from the spirit world, failed to collapse this towering White Tower. Around the White Tower, brass-colored omniscient eyes flickered, and upon the White Tower, illusory books rapidly flipped. This information was all being integrated, either absorbed by certain already formed books or compiled into new illusory books. This seemed to be an instinct of the White Tower, or rather, an embodiment of the White Tower's authority itself. There was nothing wrong with this, in fact, it was supplementing the White Tower's foundation and subtly strengthening it. However, with the hermit constantly attacking and the White Tower constantly defending, although it remained unmoving, the scene itself was not very appealing. Originally, Hariburgen, this old dragon, didn't care much for appearances. What truly made his face incredibly grim was that the hermit was actually exploiting the White Tower's authority. Information bombardment was just one attack method, another was information assimilation. The 2 attack methods proceeded in parallel. While the omniscient eye was organizing and absorbing this complex information, the information torrent was also attempting to decompose and assimilate the illusory White Tower. This was not an easy task, nor would it succeed quickly, but numerous peeping eyes were recording the illusory books on the White Tower. The hermit generously published this compiled knowledge into the spirit world database, not in the form of scattered information, but as illusory books, as sets of organized information, freely released into the spirit world for all beyonders who could access the spirit world to borrow. The Dragon of Wisdom, Herobergen's mythical creature form, was the White Tower. The White Tower, being a tower-shaped structure, naturally followed a wider at the bottom, narrower at the top architectural style. The lower levels of the White Tower stored ordinary knowledge not involving the Beander domain, while the upper levels stored knowledge from the mysterious domain. This clearly stratified knowledge system could be said to be the result of the collective efforts of generations of beings in Earth's civilization from the Second Epoch until now. Now, the hermit, relying on his special authority, could naturally peer into these foundational knowledge structures and publish the copied content for free on the Spirit World Network platform. This action had a certain impact in the spirit world, because previously, Herobergen had not been generous enough to upload his organized and collected content for free to the spirit world. A scholar also had no obligation to publicly open his archives to the masses. The Dragon of Wisdom, Herobergen, watched with a grim expression as a transparent, almost white, civilization light grew brighter in his vision. How could he not see that the hermit was using his foundation as knowledge material for the hermit to digest the Sequence 1 Civilization Illuminator potion of the Paragon Pathway? This elf indeed had not yet digested the Sequence 1 Beander characteristic of the Paragon Pathway. Herobergen had long realized this. Perhaps the acting and digestion of the Knowledge Emperor characteristic could proceed in secret, by accumulating mystical knowledge. But the Paragon Pathway represented knowledge of the realistic side, especially the Sequence 1 of the Paragon Pathway. This required promoting the overall advancement of civilization, and it was more inclined towards advancement in knowledge and technology. King Constan had not vigorously promoted education or technological innovation and productivity upgrades before, so the Civilization Illuminator characteristic within him was definitely digested to a limited extent. This was originally a flaw, but now the opponent was actually digesting the Paragon Potion by publicly revealing his knowledge system. The hermit's approach was very simple. To achieve the enlightenment of civilization, one did not necessarily have to lead the trend of the times. Simply making public some knowledge that was spread on a small scale in the history of civilization's development, or that was not compiled into books, or not widely announced, was itself enough to be called a civilization light. In a place like the spirit world, which is related to most mystical rituals, publishing the knowledge system established by the God of Knowledge itself provided enough mystical feedback to meet the hermit's current needs. He was now beginning to absorb the Beander characteristic of the Civilization Illuminator. This was true absorption, not the previous shepherding. After abandoning the storm pathway, absorbing an additional Sequence 1 of an adjacent pathway was almost a pure enhancement for the hermit. As the hermit digested and absorbed this Sequence 1 characteristic of an adjacent pathway, his strength naturally continued to increase. In the Dragon of Wisdom's eyes, this meant that the opponent was gradually digesting the potion, his strength was being reinforced, and he was doing it by publicly revealing his knowledge system. Herobergen's face was grim. Of course, he couldn't be generous enough to freely give away his efforts, but he had no way to stop it. Even if he simulated the secrecy of the darkness pathway, the hermit could still dispel the simulated darkness by simulating the sun authority, and the peeping eye continued to scan. Even if he dispelled the illusory image of the White Tower, it was useless. He himself was the White Tower, this knowledge was within him. The authority of the peeping eye, combined with some stealing authority, meant that those books at the bottom of the White Tower, which did not involve mystical knowledge and were more related to the realistic side, were still constantly being stolen and copied by the hermit. Who made the hermit a true god of the knowledge pathway? The White Tower had no effective way to deal with the hermit's crude information bombardment. He could stand firm in the torrent of information, but he could not stop his own knowledge from being replicated by the information torrent, even if he could preserve the upper level, mysterious knowledge involving beyonder powers. But the ordinary knowledge in the lower levels, which had already been submerged by the information torrent, could only be watched as it flowed away. Reborn had no good solution. The best solution would be not to directly confront the hermit, but the earth was only so big. If the hermit insisted on entanglement, even trying to avoid battle would be meaningless. The hermit could still publish the knowledge to the spirit world after obtaining it. He therefore chose to autonomously scramble the content of the illusory books on the lower levels. Chapter 226, I Become a God, You Retreat. To prevent the hermit from benefiting, the Dragon of Wisdom, Reborn, chose to forge books. Illusory books with scrambled information appeared one after another. If the hermit were to steal these books, it would effectively slow down his digestion of the Illuminator characteristic. Reborn couldn't completely stop the hermit from copying, he could only try to delay him through various means, increasing the cost of the hermit's copying. His actions did have some effect. The hermit, whether for his own stability or his inherent personality, disliked incorrect knowledge. The hermit indeed gained a process of using the sun authority to verify authenticity and the knowledge authority to complete and revise books. Shah-Ir himself was not in a hurry. He was treating Reborn as an experience package to consume. As long as no other gods intervened, Reborn couldn't escape. Forcibly fleeing might be possible, but then being pursued by the hermit would only make him more disheveled and expose more flaws. In terms of raw power, the hermit steadily suppressed the White Tower, and that advantage was continuously growing. In the real world, the other gods, whether the Black Emperor, the Fallen God, or Night, Earth, God of Combat, Demon Kings, and so on, the rest of the gods in the entire world did not participate in this divine battle occurring in the spirit world. 3 months were enough for these gods to understand that the hermit was in existence on their level. Moreover, the hermit seemed to have the White Tower cornered. There was no benefit in helping. The hermit could simply disappear and then harass the White Tower again after some time. Such a thankless task held no interest for the gods. Not only did the gods have no reaction, but even the Constant Kingdom did not directly declare war on the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom. Under Shah-Ir's alternate accounts arrangements, the atmosphere between the elves and the Storm Church was rather delicate. If the hermit wasn't busy, perhaps the elves would have been eager to go to war with the Storm Church. In the spirit world, the vast, white light enveloped the White Tower, and the Dragon of Knowledge and Wisdom was completely bogged down. Solomon Kingdom. The Black Emperor's original intention to go to war with the Constant Kingdom faded directly after Shah-Ir became a god. Not only that, this ambitious Black Emperor even felt that this was an excellent opportunity, and his ally, the fallen god, also thought it was a good opportunity. The Red Angel, Medici, set off again, without an army, coming alone to the Constant royal palace to meet Shah-Ir under the guise of negotiation. Sit. Shah-Ir waved his hand, not putting on any airs. You must be aware of my purpose. Solomon wants to cooperate with you. Our interests are aligned. After Medici sat down, he didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. The so-called United Front, of course, was to jointly suppress the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Sunnia Island belongs to the elves. I also want the Lord of Storms' kingdom on Earth to get out of the North Continent. If the first statement was a condition, then the second was the basis for cooperation and a shared desire between the two parties. Did Shah-Ir hate the Lord of Storms, Leodoro? Strictly speaking, he didn't really hate him. He hadn't suffered any losses at the hands of the Lord of Storms, nor did he like to blame this or hate that at the drop of a hat. But the elves were his people, and Shah-Ir had become a god. So, regardless of whether individual hatred existed, he had to reclaim Sunnia Island, and the Lord of Storms' faith also had to get out of the North Continent. This was power, this was prestige, this was reason. I don't hate you, but I've become a god, so you have to get out. There was nothing to be conflicted about. Ha ha ha. Good. Seeing Shah so straightforward, Medici couldn't help but burst into laughter. Especially when he thought of Leodore's humiliated appearance, he felt even happier. I can promise you on behalf of Solomon. Sunia Island will be returned to the elves, and the Solomon Empire will not interfere with your elven island. Since both sides had reached an agreement, Medici didn't procrastinate. I know the hunter's authority. With you as the core, Solomon should be able to know about our conversation. I can give him a gift. The Constant Kingdom can submit to the Solomon Empire, agreeing to his overt unification of the entire North Continent. This is a gesture of goodwill from me, but not entirely. A vast, unified empire is also a significant chapter in the development of civilization. Shah decided to form a more complete alliance with Solomon. His main account was currently restricted to the spirit world. Although he could unleash the power of a king of angels, or even a bit higher, it would require sacrificing his life. The life of an avatar is still a life. If it dies too early, the hermit currently doesn't have the energy to create a second avatar. It would be better to establish an order and reduce some troubles through a strict hierarchical system. Shah also wanted to promote the development of civilization in the era. The North Continent, from ancient times to the present, it seemed that a unified, vast empire had never emerged. Whether it was Klein's era, or the Third Epoch, it was always like this. The ancient sun god only nominally ruled the world and did not establish a kingdom. This was a groundbreaking moment. I agree. A majestic and deep voice appeared in the royal palace. With the fallen god as an ally, Solomon naturally knew what kind of social environment the hermit needed to develop into a paragon. For Solomon, this was barely the optimal solution. Future matters could be considered after the three gods were first excluded from the North Continent. Then hurry up. After you nominally unify the North Continent, with the bonus of the power of order, you will have an advantage against other sequences. Shah didn't want to see the three gods' kingdoms on Earth still in the North Continent after all this trouble. That would be a bit embarrassing. To avoid any awkward surprises, it would be better to strengthen Solomon. No problem. Welcome the Constant Kingdom's inclusion. I can bestow upon you the title of White Emperor of the Solomon Empire. In terms of etiquette, your status will be only slightly lower than mine, and higher than all other dukes. Facing an ally like Shah, who had his own base and his own throne, and was purely joining, Solomon couldn't possibly grant him the title of a duke. However, he also couldn't accept Shah still holding the title of King of Constant. It would be better to incorporate Shah into the Solomon Empire's system of order. As long as the Black Emperor legally and institutionally outranked the White Emperor, Solomon would profit without loss. To show sincerity, a dark vortex appeared, and a silver crown flew out of it. An dark-colored gem was embedded in the crown. This gem was a Beander characteristic of the Black Emperor pathway sequence too. Since Shah was willing to cooperate and concede so much, Solomon naturally returned a gift of equal weight. Shah caught the crown and felt the power of order on it. He acknowledged this order. At the level of a god, every decision is enough to have far-reaching effects. The moment Shah, as the ruler of a nation, accepted the Black Emperor's conferral, even if the two nations hadn't yet begun formal cooperation, at the level of order, the Black Emperor had already become the emperor of the entire North Continent. Even if some aspects were still lacking, the Black Emperor could distort order to gain corresponding power recognition in advance. Now, it's your turn to perform, Black Emperor, and Fallen God. Shah's lips curved slightly upwards, anticipating the outbreak of two divine wars. As you wish, White Emperor. The distorted passage broke, and the Black Emperor's majestic voice disappeared. Do you want to watch the show with me? Shah toyed with the silver-white crown in his hand, casually snapping his fingers. The silver mirror in the great hall lit up, and dazzling golden light seemed to shoot directly through the mirror, then it seemed to distort, and the golden radiance dimmed. Haha, those two bastards are going to be unlucky. Do you have any wine here? Medici looked at the content on the mirror, able to guess that the Black Emperor and the eternal blazing sun were fighting. Since the Black Emperor chose to fight the sun, then the Lord of Storms was naturally facing the colossal true god, the fallen god. Medici was eager for a couple of drinks. Shah Ayar tossed Medici a bottle of red wine. He himself also focused on this war. There was no need to directly witness the specific outcome of the divine war. Simply by observing the trajectories of the sun and storm, he could roughly confirm the specific result. The Lord of Storms was certainly not weak, but compared to the fallen god, if he couldn't win, he still couldn't win. The eternal blazing sun was also very strong, but now the Black Emperor had a legal advantage. Nominally, most of the North Continent was the territory of the Solomon Empire, and the order in these places would subtly repel the eternal blazing sun. In terms of a war of attrition, both the Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun would be at a disadvantage to a certain extent, just like the god of knowledge and wisdom currently imprisoned in the spirit world. Shah Ayar took a sip of red wine, then looked at Medici, who had already downed several bottles, and said, "You can leave. I still have things to do here, so I won't entertain you." Medici chuckled at the words. Wasn't it just about taking advantage of the Lord of Storms being tied up to strike at the Storm Church? I also need to go back and prepare. This time, we'll directly drive the churches of those few guys into the sea. Medici understood perfectly. He knew that the battlefield at the true god level couldn't produce an absolute victory or defeat. To gradually squeeze out the faith and churches of the three gods, Feng Zibai, it was necessary to continuously exert force from the middle and lower levels. Ha ha ha, my little darlings, your grandpa Medici is here. Medici directly transformed into a stream of fiery light and vanished. After he left, two more people appeared beside Shah Ayar. One was the elf queen, Gao Exaname, and the other was the god of luck, Serves. After the Dawn Age, the elves have been silent for too long. It's time for them to vent. Shah Ayar didn't explain much. These two former elven subsidiary gods both had considerable experience and knew what to do. This war had to be fought. It was a soul-forging battle for the elves. A whole epic of silence and humiliation. It was time for a cleansing. I didn't expect you to cross pathways and become a god in just 100 years. Gao Exaname really hadn't expected that expectation to be realized so quickly. Fast. Shah Ayar shook his head and chuckled. Old Huang only took 20 or 30 years, right? Klein only took 3 years. 100 years, he was still one of the weaker ones. You two go yourselves. Over the years, you two must have accumulated a lot of anger, right? Shah Ayar nodded gently at the god of luck. The angel of destiny, Ouroboros, wouldn't bother the god of luck at this time. Now was the time for both sides to tacitly suppress the three gods. I'll take care of the Storm Church. The god of luck, Serves, undertook the relatively dangerous part of the mission. Then I'll go suppress the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom. Lightning flashed in Gao Exaname's eyes. She gave Shah Ayar a gentle look, then transformed into lightning and disappeared. At the same time, the god of luck also vanished silently. Over the years, both of them clearly had a fire in their hearts. The elves rise up, and while we're at it, give the sanguine a hand. Shah Ayar turned, his figure disappearing like electricity. He felt that, although in this world, gods talking about morality was nonsense. But when it didn't involve actual interests, some basic human favors were still recognized. In the original timeline where he didn't exist, when the Earth Mother Lilith's persona could no longer be maintained and she completely stopped pretending, if the status questionable Gao Exaname prayed to Lilith, Lilith would most likely help. The two races had a bond, and the Elf King also protected the Sanguine after Lilith's fall. The reason Lilith was blackened the second most on the murals in the Forsaken Land of the Gods was probably because she didn't just observe, but actually did something. For example, out of a desire to vent for herself or the Elf King, she used the Mother's authority to delay the birth, resurrection of the lesser true creator. Earth God Kingdom. Shah Ayar saw the Earth Mother watering flowers. How leisurely. Shah Ayar praised the flowers that could open their mouths and drink water by themselves. Do you need my help? The Earth Mother turned around and looked at Shah Ayar, asking, her dress swaying, making her exceptionally graceful. If Shah-Ir invited her to the spirit world to beat up the god of knowledge and wisdom, she would have to consider how to politely refuse. After all, she hadn't even helped her cheap son much. If this elf didn't show a little sincerity, she was very busy. I want to talk to you about something. The sanguine ancestor, the elf king, and the giant king have all fallen. The conflicts between the three extraordinary races, in the current world order, don't seem that important anymore, do they? Shah-Ir still remembered the sanguine marquis who troubled him due to coincidence while he was searching for Grossel's travels, and the sanguine duke who was also affected by coincidence. These two unlucky fellows had to respectfully bow before him. What do you want to say? The Earth Mother Lilith was joyful in her heart, but her expression remained calm and gentle as she asked. Because of me, some sanguine have joined the Constant Kingdom before. Elves, having the ability, naturally have to take care of the sanguine. I plan to protect the sanguine. What do you think? Shah-Ir's meaning was very simple. He planned to have the sanguine serve him, so he informed the Earth Mother, telling her not to target the sanguine, who were on an adjacent pathway. This way, wouldn't she be able to continue openly absorbing and influencing the sanguine? The originally holy and dignified Earth Mother gently licked her lips. Elves and sanguine as one family, it's not impossible. Chapter 228, False Deification, True Deification. I can avoid targeting the sanguine. The Earth Mother seemed to ponder seriously for a moment before saying something that made Shah-Ir want to roll his eyes. As long as you don't deliberately target them, everything else is your freedom. Shah-Ir simply conceded a step. When do you plan to subdue the sanguine queen? The Earth Mother, Lilith, asked with great interest. She seemed quite pleased with the prospect, even encouraging Shah-Ir to confront and eliminate the beauty goddess, Ornia, immediately. How undignified would it be to go now? Once the North Continent is completely unified, the influence of the three churches is pushed out, and the elves regain their noble status from the Second Epoch, the sanguine will naturally submit. Shah-Ir shook his head. He was too lazy to go to Ornia to reason, make grand promises, or persuade her to lead the sanguine to follow him. Such an undignified task was beneath him. After his emergence, first banning the Dragon of Wisdom, then joining forces with the Black Emperor to reshape the world order, he was truly deifying on Earth. Not the kind of so-called god who only possessed power, was newly promoted, lacked actual achievements and personal prestige. Rather, he was a true god, with a distinct personality, capable of making all gods, all angels, all beyonders, and all ordinary people look his way. Did the hermit still need to recruit the sanguine? Shouldn't the sanguine be sensible enough to come and pledge allegiance on their own initiative? Preferably with sincerity, with the sanguine queen herself coming, lowering her head. The fool's deification was still too gentle. Ha ha. The Earth Mother offered no comment, merely chuckling. The sanguine, no matter how one looked at it, truly had to bow their heads. If they didn't do so voluntarily, the Earth Mother herself was a god of a neighboring pathway to the moon pathway. Now, with such a god, who had a good relationship with the Earth Mother, as long as she hinted at it, even with 10 times their courage, the sanguine wouldn't dare not kneel. In that instant, Lilith thought that she would also subtly hint to the sanguine to kneel gracefully and promptly, and her smile brightened a few shades. What do you think of the Church of the Earth Mother becoming the state religion of the nascent Solomon Empire in the near future? The common people regard food as their heaven. I believe the Earth Mother Church is duty-bound. Shah-Ir intended to do a little good deed. If the Earth Mother Church prospered, it might benefit the common people, and only when ordinary people were well fed would they have the inclination to study. I think your proposal is excellent. The Earth Mother was a little surprised. She had originally thought Shah-Ir was coming to inform her of his intention to establish his own hermit church, but it turned out he planned to give the Church of the Earth Mother a push. Lilith pondered for a moment. She thought that if Ornia took a subordinate role, it wasn't impossible. The common people regard food as their heaven. This saying must be written into the holy scriptures of the Church of the Earth Mother. This woman, suspected to be a remnant of an outer deity, directly plagiarized this saying under Shah-Ir's name. One wonders if, many years later, Rosal would have a fleeting sense of familiarity, then investigate carefully, only to discover it was a beautiful coincidence. The world's pattern underwent immense changes in the time that followed. The Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun, despite their best efforts, still couldn't overcome the fallen god and the Black Emperor. The Dragon of Wisdom was still trapped in the spirit world by the Hermit. The churches of Feng, Ji, and Bai, facing the combined suppression of the Constant Kingdom and the Solomon Empire, as well as the covert exclusion by several other church forces, such as the Night Church, the God of War Church, and the Earth Mother Church, couldn't even remain in the most barren lands of the North Continent. They were forced to migrate south, towards the South Continent. This was almost a foregone conclusion, even gods intervening could hardly reverse the situation. The Lord of Storms and the eternal blazing sun also did not continue to entangle with the fallen god and the Black Emperor in the astral world. Further fighting had little meaning. The South Continent still had a death, and occasionally active, devil kings, along with the secretly operating god of spirit creatures. These two could only swallow this bitter loss and, in the relatively unfamiliar South Continent, create suitable living land for these migrating North Continent believers. Meanwhile, in the South Continent, Salinger, the Death, who was preparing to unify the entire South Continent and establish the Balaam Empire, cursed profusely. Despite his disgust for these newcomers from the north, he could only take advantage of their unfamiliarity with the environment to first occupy the harvest plains and establish the Balaam Empire. After this great victory, the Constant Kingdom was officially incorporated into the Solomon Empire. The first White Emperor arrived in the capital of the Solomon Empire, a city located on the coast of the Intersea, at the end of the Honachus Mountains, geographically somewhat close to the future Loan Kingdom's important city, Constant City. He met Solomon, a tall and dignified man, and also saw the Zoroaster family's victim, as well as Zeratul, who appeared at some unknown time. Currently, Sha'ir had not yet met the fallen god. Although his classmate Grisha had looked at him from afar, Sha'ir did not look back directly, as that would be impolite, and the image of the giant hanged man was not suitable to appear in the Solomon Empire's palace. Upon entering the territory of the Solomon Empire, Sha'ir had indeed seen some humanoid statues of the fallen god. On the statues, there were cloth-like coverings over parts of the face and some unmentionable special areas. At this time, Grisha, no matter what, would still care about such things. Inside Solomon's palace, a tall long table stood, with two black iron chairs facing each other. On the surrounding walls, hanging chandeliers emitted a faint glow. There were 41 chandeliers on the left and 40 on the right. The Black Emperor sat on the left, leaving the empty seat on the right for the White Emperor. Sha'ir was indifferent to the overall asymmetrical style of the palace. Even for Solomon, as the emperor, his dark attire still featured an asymmetrical design on either side of the central axis. Most other people in the palace also adopted this style. Sha'ir didn't appear too out of place either. One side of his hair was black, the other silver, and his attire was predominantly white, with only slight distinctions in the patterns on his clothes. Those with poor eyesight might not even notice that the entirely white robe was asymmetrical. A physical map of the North Continent was laid on the table. This was for dividing, allocating territories. On the map, Sunia Island was entirely white, signifying its allocation to the White Emperor, a condition that had been agreed upon from the start. However, the Black Emperor's subsequent actions became rather intriguing. Chapter 229, The Six Gods Divide the Cake. On the map of the North Continent, besides Sunia Island being given to the White Emperor, the Black Emperor, without even consulting, also allocated Bakland, a crucial core city on the eastern side of the North Continent, to the White Emperor. This allocation meant that Bakland would be directly under the White Emperor's command, practically becoming his private fiefdom. Sha'ir looked at Bakland's position on the map and suddenly wondered if, in the future, when he joked with the members of the Tarot Club, he could say that Bakland was once their family's hereditary, free city. That this land had been their family's territory since ancient times. The Black Emperor is indeed generous. The White Emperor smiled. Why refuse a free core city? Although his base was on the western side of the continent, primarily the area that would later become the Intis Republic, the Black Emperor gave him a core city on the eastern side of the continent. This must be to make it easier for him to manage Sunia Island. The Black Emperor is truly considerate. The Black Emperor, Solomon, watched the White Emperor's indifferent reaction, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. A plain beneath the central plateau in the southern part of the North Continent on the map became prominent. I promise to enthrone the Earth Mother Church as the state religion of the Solomon Empire. This plain is my gift to the Earth Mother Church. The Black Emperor's tone was calm, as if to thank the Earth Mother for her support, or to highlight the status of the Earth Mother Church. He directly gave the most suitable plain for growing grain on the North Continent to the Earth Mother Church. Beneath the two thrones, Roland, the Pope of the Earth Mother Church, bowed to the Black Emperor and accepted the gift. Shah-Ir smiled, watching as the Black Emperor separated the Earth Mother Church from his inherent territory, subtly arranging the headquarters of the Earth Mother Church in the southern part of the North Continent, which would become the main part of the future Phaenopotter Kingdom. Although not mandatory, that plain in the southern North Continent had suitable climate, fertile land, and such a large area given directly to the Earth Mother Church meant that the Earth Mother Church would inevitably establish a core diocese there, which aligned with the Earth Mother Church's long-term development needs. After the Black Emperor arranged for the Earth Mother Church, he pointed to the location of the future Phaesac Empire. The Phaesac Empire was located on the northeastern side of the North Continent, with most of its western portion having been gradually encroached upon by the White Emperor. However, the vast Antares Mountains, which pierced through these areas, coupled with the extremely cold climate in the north, made it very unsuitable for ordinary human life. The eastern side of the Phaesac Empire, closer to the Intersea, was considered the essence of the Phaesac Empire. Because it was close to the Intersea, and the fighting near the Intersea was quite fierce, the White Emperor had not been able to conquer it at that time. Now, the Black Emperor allocated this area to the God of War Church, as the giants already had a certain foundation here. The Black Emperor then allocated the areas west of the Intersea, including the former Winter County, Eastchester County, and other regions south of the Amantha Mountains, to the Night Church. This division was quite interesting. The land given to the God of War Church was in the northwest direction of the Intersea, while the land given to the Night Church was in the northeast direction of the Intersea. The God of War Church and the Night Church, two churches with conflicts and frictions between them, faced each other across the Intersea, and the capital of the Solomon Empire was south of the Intersea, perfectly positioned in the middle of the two. Moreover, the locations of both churches were relatively good, but actually very cold regions. The Pope of the God of War Church and Marian, the Pope of the Night Church, exchanged glances. They did not express any opinions. Furthermore, there were no perfunctory bows or any other gestures of etiquette. They merely nodded, acknowledging the Black Emperor's status as a true god. The Black Emperor didn't mind the somewhat perfunctory and dissatisfied attitudes of the two popes. He looked at the White Emperor sitting opposite him, asking for his thoughts. Although the god of combat and the Evernight goddess were true gods, the current North Continent was unified by the Solomon Empire in conjunction with the former Constan Kingdom. The Solomon Empire's dominant position was established by stepping on the churches of the three true gods, Wind, Wisdom, and White. The attitudes of the God of War Church and the Night Church needed to be considered, but not overly emphasized. Although the Earth Mother did not directly participate in the God Wars, she had sided with the former Constan Kingdom. Since neither the God of War Church nor the Night Church had true gods participating in the God Wars, and neither church directly took a side, they naturally had to stand aside when the spoils of victory were divided. The White Emperor nodded slightly, approving the Black Emperor's arrangements. From then on, all 6 gods of the former North Continent were pushed into the remote regions of the North Continent. The churches of Wind, Wisdom, and White, which had gradually departed, are temporarily not mentioned. The Night Church, the God of War Church, and the Earth Mother Church, these 3 churches also, moved away from the core of the North Continent. Although the land received by the Earth Mother Church was vast, had a suitable climate, and fertile soil. It was in the south of the North Continent. The Knight Church's territory was bordered by the Amantha Mountains to the north, the Intersea to the west, and Sunia Island to the east. The God of War Church's territory was bordered by the Andar Mountains to the west, the Honachus Mountains to the south, and the Intersea to the southwest. The Black Emperor, being very thoughtful, selected 2 good pieces of land from generally less favorable areas and distributed them to the 2 true God churches that had not taken sides. Under this division, the best lands in the entire North Continent were roughly 2 areas. The western side, the region of the Intis Republic, and the eastern side, the region of the Loan Kingdom. These 2 areas were separated by the Central Mountains and the Honachus Mountains. The western side was the White Emperor's traditional sphere of influence. The eastern side was the area more deeply controlled by the Black Emperor. The fallen god did not require additional territory. The Black Emperor's actual ruling area naturally became the primary region for the spread of the fallen god's faith. This was because these 2 were bound together from the very beginning when they established the nation, and they remained bound together when expelling other churches later, making it difficult to separate them. If the hermit were to return from the spirit world at this moment, then the pattern of the North Continent would be the hermit in the west, the fallen god in the east, the Earth Mother in the south, the god of combat and the Evernight goddess divided in the northwest and northeast, and the Black Emperor in the Intersea, centrally located. The 6 gods would check and balance each other. The Evernight goddess and the god of combat were the most heavily checked. However, the other gods were also gently checked. When the White Emperor wanted to reclaim Sunia Island, the Black Emperor conveniently placed the Evernight goddess to the west of Sunia Island, geographically encircling the Evernight goddess's divine kingdom on earth. The White Emperor's foundation was in the west, so the Black Emperor gave the White Emperor an important eastern hub city, making the White Emperor focus some energy on the eastern part of the empire instead of being a local emperor who listened to orders but didn't act in the west. At the same time, this left an opening for himself to intervene in the west in the future. Chapter 230, Find a Way to Love Me Yourself. The White Emperor is not a god of the order pathway or the reality pathway. Shah-Ir also didn't care about some of the political arrangements Solomon made. He is now the god of knowledge, and he doesn't want to play power games with order gods, nor does he want to compete in combat power with those more aggressive battle gods. A god of knowledge should do what a god of knowledge should do. Especially with the god of knowledge and wisdom being suppressed, the hermit must prioritize knowledge. The Solomon Empire is a unified, powerful, and vast empire. Shah-Ir said a pleasantry. After all, he even had the right to confer dukedoms, so he wasn't too averse to Solomon, the true emperor, at the moment. The laws of the empire should be unified. The Black Emperor was not moved by the White Emperor's pleasantries. He allowed the White Emperor to hold many privileges, but the unification of laws was what the Black Emperor valued most, second only to nominal unification. Order and law are often closely related. I believe no one understands how to formulate a perfect set of laws better than a lawyer. But qualified laws must be universally recognized and clearly promulgated. Shah-Ir didn't care about legislative power, but he wanted to ensure his freedom of activity. The other several popes remained silent, but their meaning was roughly the same. Your laws, everyone can give you face, but if they are too harsh, then the various churches will consider it at their discretion. The meeting concluded smoothly. The specific negotiation results were eventually disseminated in various forms within the upper circles. Shah-Ir then, in the name of the White Emperor, conferred the title of Duke of the Solomon Empire upon Sauron and Einhorn, 2 angels who had achieved outstanding military merits. He returned to Trier, where a massive royal palace had already been constructed. The Queen of the Sanguine, Olnia, and Round Moon Olmer, were already waiting there. The White Emperor personally met these 2 after conferring the 2 dukedoms. He waved his hand at the 2 angels, motioning for them to sit wherever they pleased. This was the extraordinary world, not a mundane dynasty. There weren't so many formalities. The alliance between the Sanguine and the elves was only forced to break off when both ancient gods had passed away. But the relationship between the two sides is still closer than that of other forces. Shah-Ir wasn't being sarcastic. After the Elf King's demise, the elves scattered and were forced to migrate. The Sanguine were not much better off, still dispersed in various places until Shah-Ir established the Constant Kingdom, and the Sanguine gradually regrouped. On the surface, the Sanguine ancestor Lilith really died. Over the years, quite a few Sanguine have died. It's just that the Church of the Earth Mother's methods are gentler, so the Sanguine have fared relatively better. For most low to mid-level Sanguine, joining an elf god or submitting to the tyranny of the giantess is a no-brainer. Not to mention the Sanguine who were already serving in the Constant Kingdom. After the White Emperor's reputation grew, more and more Sanguine would come to pledge allegiance. Although this is our first meeting, you and Gao Exaname should be old acquaintances. There's no need for unnecessary pleasantries. From now on, you are both dukes of the Solomon Empire, dukes personally conferred by me. The Sanguine only need to be responsible to me. Shah-Ir didn't give the Sanguine Queen and Round Moon, Ulmer a chance to speak. There was absolutely no need for it. Currently, the highest Sanguine is Sequence 1, there's no need for so much talk. Just follow this Emperor's arrangements. The elves have another such god. Olnia and Ulmer exchanged glances. Both thought of the time they had pledged allegiance to the Elf King Sunyasolam. The only difference was that the Elf King's voice was louder, his prestige more terrifying, while the White Emperor before them was, after all, just an avatar. We obey your will, Your Majesty the White Emperor. Beauty Goddess Olnia bowed slightly, her perfect figure fully displayed. Even without the Earth Mother Lilith's hint, she would have arranged for the Sanguine to side with the White Emperor, let alone with the ancestors' clear hint now. Round Moon, Ulmer had even fewer objections. He was even contemplating combining the Sanguine's internal sequence system with the Solomon Empire's noble system. Now is the time when His Majesty the White Emperor needs people, and the Sanguine can become the White Emperor's eyes placed everywhere. Round Moon, Ulmer, as an old Sanguine who had once followed the Sanguine ancestor Lilith, had experienced the glory of the ancient god era, witnessed the decline of extraordinary races, and personally watched the sun rise, as well as the fall of the creator who surpassed gods. This life-giver considered his discernment to be quite unique. Now that the North Continent's structure is set, Ulmer believed that the Solomon Empire could rule the North Continent for at least 1,000 years, and it was even very possible for it to dominate the direction of the entire Fourth Epoch. The Sanguine integrating at this time would definitely be able to regain the glory and status of the Second Epoch. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Round Moon, Ulmer left. He had to arrange Sanguine matters. What folly it would be for good Sanguine youths not to follow His Majesty the White Emperor and serve as nobles and local lords in the Solomon Empire, but instead to idle away in the Church of the Earth Mother. Establishing a certain connection with the Earth Mother Church is necessary, but a proper distance must still be maintained. His Majesty the White Emperor is the god worth following. The elves also have no need for the moon pathway, and both sides have a long-term basis for cooperation. Following the White Emperor guarantees status, safety, and freedom. At this time, since beauty goddess Olnia was still alive, this little Duke of Sequence 2 had no idea what kind of joke his dear ancestor had played on him. In the era when true gods walked the earth, a Sequence 2 knowing too important a secret was still somewhat unsafe. He might have vaguely sensed something before, but he couldn't have guessed that his ancestor had transformed into the Mother of Giants. This Sanguine Duke currently still regards the Earth Mother Church and the Earth Mother as objects to be wary of and guarded against, limiting the Sanguine's contact with the Church of the Earth Mother. Lilith was serious about her disguises, otherwise, the Omibella disguise wouldn't have lasted so long. Shah-Ir glanced at the remaining Olnia. He had to admit that the beauty goddess's ultimate beauty was truly interesting. Compared to a Sequence 1 demoness, it might even be superior. His Beander characteristic was high enough, so he enjoyed it without hindrance for a while, then picked up a quill pen and wrote a letter on parchment. Dear Cheek, when you see this letter, you should understand that I have the ability to help you simulate the power of the Chaos Sea, And I can also transform your love, according to the needs of the Beander potion formula, into a dream-like substance that exists between reality and illusion. As for this true love originating from yourself, you will have to find a way yourself. Either you find a way to love me, or you try to love something else, or find a woman and fall in love with her. It's best not to deceive yourself with your advancement ritual, that would be very unwise. Chapter 231, The White Queen. The true love of a demoness, how rare a thing. Shah Ayar savored the wicked humor of the potion formula, and continued writing nonchalantly. For people of our status to talk about love or not love, it really is a bit disgusting. You should still consider self-love. Love your current female self, or whatever. Love her, love you. No one dislikes a demoness. This is the easiest thing to collect. After Shah Ayar finished writing the letter, he rolled up the parchment and threw it directly into the silver mirror in front of him. The mirror surface rippled like water, transmitting the parchment into the mirror world where the recipient could receive it. God's talking about true love, it sounded somewhat ironic. You're still here. He looked up and saw Olnaya, the beauty goddess, who had not left. Although the question was a bit redundant, it was a gesture of attitude. Your Majesty, the White Emperor, do you need a queen to assist you? The beauty goddess Olnaya's long silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, her voice carrying a mature charm. Her self-recommendation at this moment was very alluring. Not really. Shah Ayar shook his head. Did he need help with work? The elves had their own system. Gao Exaname would handle things very well. He currently didn't have his own church. As for the internal affairs of the Solomon Empire, what a joke. Not to mention the all-capable Erodes, as the White Emperor, how could he not have his own staff? The beauty goddess Olnaya's offer to be queen was more about a political marriage than genuinely wanting to handle miscellaneous tasks for Shah Ayar. She was, after all, a Sequence 1 archangel. I understand, you don't need me that much. But you are, after all, the future long-term White Emperor of the Solomon Empire. You may not need a Sequence 1 archangel, but you might need a queen, and as the beauty goddess, am I not the most suitable choice? The beauty goddess Olnaya showed no sadness at Shah Ayar's coldness. She crossed her legs, her long legs naturally displayed, and her tone was filled with strong confidence. What you say makes some sense. Shah Ayar nodded upon hearing this. What she said indeed made sense. Although he was closer to Gao Exaname, it was precisely because of that closeness that there was no need for this. Finding a queen was a minor matter. Whether there was one, how many, or how often they were changed, it wasn't important. Would the lower echelons of the Solomon Empire dare to question anything? Or would the nobles of the Solomon Empire pressure him to establish a legitimate empress early on? Precisely because it was a minor matter, there was no need to overthink it. The sanguine Queen Olnaya was very suitable as a Sequence 1. She surpassed an ordinary Sequence 2, but did not surpass a Sequence 1, and was not qualified to compete for godhood. And the beauty goddess, even if she was just a pretty face, was pleasant enough to look at and wouldn't cause too much trouble. You could have said so earlier. Then I wouldn't have had to confer upon you the title of Duke of the Solomon Empire, although this conferment was merely verbal and no elaborate ceremony was actually held. Shah Ayar agreed. If it were before, he might have considered the Night Emperor he knew, the Truncest Empire he was familiar with, trying not to let the timeline deviate from his familiar trajectory. But now, he didn't care much. Since he had already become a god, there was no need to be timid. He didn't need to live like a marionette. We will certainly get along very happily. After receiving Shah Ayar's reply, the beauty goddess, or rather, the White Queen, smiled, her exquisite face radiant. She walked gracefully to the side of the massive throne, directly sat into Shah Ayar's lap, wrapped her arms around his neck, and passionately kissed him. It wasn't that there was no emotion, on the contrary, Olnaya's blood-red eyes were full of emotion. Shah Ayar wrapped his arms around her soft waist, his fingertips gently caressing her smooth, lustrous silver hair. The woman breathed slightly, the bloodlight in her eyes receding, replaced by an indescribable allure. Shah Ayar lay sideways on the throne, watching Olnaya's hands resting on his chest. Her eyes were full of anticipation and desire. Without him needing to say much, she followed her own preferred rhythm, like a small boat at night, stretching her body with the rise and fall of the waves, feeling the comfort brought by the evening breeze. All of this was very simple. The Night Emperor and the Beauty Goddess in the original timeline still needed a long period of interaction to cultivate true feelings. Shah-Ayar didn't need that here. In the eyes of the Beauty Goddess Olnaya, facing such a newly ascended god of elven origin, this White Emperor of the Solomon Empire, who actually ruled nearly a quarter of the entire North Continent's territory and had a decent relationship with the Earth Mother, did Shah-Ayar still need to cultivate any extra feelings? It was non-existent. She was now the White Queen, and of course, she should enjoy this win-win moment with her beloved Shah-Ayar. Did she not love Shah-Ayar now? Of course, she did. Shah-Ayar, as a part-time spectator, could clearly see genuine emotion and love in her eyes. Did Shah-Ayar love her? Yes, he did. The wonderful melody composed of various sounds in the palace hall was the most obvious love between the two. At least both parties were satisfied with this sincere, full, and warm emotion. The fifth epic. Unable to sleep, Shah-Ayar got up and invited Furs out. He had no particular intentions, just wanted to admire the moon and act refined. The moon in the sky was crimson, and the moon on the ground was snow white. One was enchanting, the other elegant, both were excellent colors. December 28, Tuesday. That morning, Klein pulled Emlyn to the gray mist. Klein looked at Emlyn in confusion. In this day and age, even an evil god of unknown origin like the fool dared to pray casually, which didn't seem very smart. "Why are you praying to me?" Klein preempted him. Emlyn, who hadn't reacted, subconsciously replied, "This is an revelation from the ancestor. He told us through dreams that the apocalypse is coming, and we must prepare. And I am one of the key nodes. My task is to pray to the fool and greet the hermit." Huh. Klein looked at this guy in confusion. First of all, the vampire ancestor had long since fallen. Even if he hadn't died, why would he arrange for you to pray to the fool? And what was with greeting the hermit at the end? Does your ancestor have anything to tell me? Klein began to probe. "I don't know." Emlyn shook his head blankly. He hadn't heard anything about passing on a message. What about that one? Klein suppressed his speechlessness, intending to inquire about the hermit. From the other party's words, this hermit still existed. Did he know the vampire ancestor? "I don't know." Emlyn shook his head again, and Klein's fists hardened a bit. Chapter 232, Wedding Gift. "What do you know to pray for nothing?" "No, it's not like that. Although I don't know much, I know that I don't need to search for the hermit. As long as I say the words, the mission is complete." Emlyn also seemed to feel that he was very unprofessional like this. He quickly explained himself, and although his words were a bit incoherent, Klein still managed to understand what Emlyn wanted to express with his superb reading comprehension. "Doesn't that sound like, whatever is said will be known? Is this Beyander ability so common?" Although Klein had many more questions, considering his identity as the fool, he could only ask questions that fit the persona of a great figure. Currently, there are the 7 deities, and so many hidden existences, just like the hermit you just mentioned. Why would your ancestor believe that I am the key to the apocalypse? Emlyn was very good at judging the situation. Seeing the fool's gentle tone, he felt a moment of doubt in his heart, then immediately understood. It wasn't an interrogation, but an inquiry, and no special means were used. Could it be that I represent the ancestor, which is why such a mysterious existence takes me so seriously? Emlyn's heart burned with excitement, so he immediately straightened his back and said with a respectful tone mixed with the unique accent of a sanguine noble, "Respected Mr. Fool, the ancestor's revelation is that I might be the key for the sanguine to face the apocalypse, and my first step is to begin by praying to you." To translate, it means, faced with the apocalypse, what the key to the world is, I don't know, but the key to the sanguine, that is definitely me, and your question clearly failed to understand my words. Emlyn actually put on an unyielding expression. Then why don't you pray to the other orthodox deities, or that hermit? Klein still asked, unwilling to give up. The Sanguine praying to Orthodox deities. Are they crazy? Emlyn felt that the fool definitely wasn't asking about that, so he replied, we don't know the hermit's honorific name. You Sanguine don't even know the hermit's honorific name, and you still ask. The fool was speechless. He had initially thought that the Sanguine had a good relationship with the hermit, which would be a good starting point, and perhaps could also prove that the hermit still existed. But after all this, you Sanguine don't even know the hermit's honorific name. You don't know the honorific name. The fool deliberately asked in a questioning tone. We used to know, but that honorific name later either pointed to the hidden sage or some other existence. Emlyn explained that almost no one among the Sanguine used that honorific name, and it gradually fell out of circulation. Tell me this honorific name. Klein's heart stirred, and he asked as if casually. Incarnation of knowledge, light of the spirit world, hermit of fate. Because this honorific name was very simple, Emlyn knew it. Which Orthodox deity has so many elements in its honorific name? Don't they emphasize the deity's characteristics more? Mr. Fool complained inwardly, but still remembered the honorific name for now. I probably understand what your ancestor means. If you are the key to saving the Sanguine, then I believe you will grow within the Tarot Club. That's a lie. You are, at most, a tool for your ancestor's resurrection, Mr. Fool said calmly. Emlyn nodded seriously. He was currently the only Sanguine with a connection to the Fool, so the role of liaison officer would certainly need to be maintained. The best way was to join the Tarot Club. Here, you need to abide by some rules. The Fool began to lecture. Of course. Emlyn had no objection. Without my permission, you cannot reveal anything related to the Tarot Club. The Fool smiled. Ah. Then how do I complete my mission? Emlyn was a bit reluctant. Lilith probably didn't ask you to report to anyone. Mr. Fool said with a gentle smile. Oh my goodness, how dare he call the ancestor by her name, and in a tone as if he were addressing an old friend. You are right. Emlyn saw the situation clearly and indeed bowed his head in agreement. If you are truly ambitious about the identity of a savior, then you should understand that this path is destined to be lonely and arduous, perhaps even filled with too much misunderstanding. Mr. Fool suppressed the upward curve of his lips and continued to deceive. That makes sense. If it didn't need to be kept secret, why would the ancestor specifically choose me? Emlyn nodded in agreement. When Klein saw that Emlyn was even more naive than Miss Justice at the very beginning, he no longer had any doubts, decisively acknowledged this moon, and then asked about the Sanguine history that interested him. The history of the Sanguine. Such an ancient mysterious existence certainly isn't asking about ancient history. He himself should be some ancient god who has just awakened. That should be asking about the history of the last two epochs. Our Sanguine were not uncommon in glory during the fourth epoch and fifth epoch. There are too many things worth mentioning. After considering it, Emlyn began to speak. After the Great Cataclysm, the status of our Sanguine declined, and our communities were scattered everywhere, but this process did not last long before our Sanguine returned to the center stage of the North and South continents. In the early Fourth Epoch, our Sanguine followed the footsteps of the White Emperor of the Solomon Empire, making immense contributions to the Solomon Empire's eventual unification of the entire North continent. Our queen married that great emperor, and the entire Sanguine race recoalesced with the rise of the White Emperor, becoming an important force within the Solomon Empire. At that time, Sauron of Intis and Einhorn of Fasak all had to respect our queen's status, respect the strength of our Sanguine, and respectfully address our queen as Her Majesty, the esteemed White Queen. In that era, Queen Olnaya was the symbol of beauty. There was a mirror in the court at that time that could answer any question. If one were to ask it, who is the most beautiful woman in the world, the answer would undoubtedly only be our queen. Emlyn was a bit nervous at first, but the more he spoke, the more proud he became, even feeling a sense of being born in the wrong era, regretting not having been born in that age when the Sanguine once again ruled the North Continent. A mirror that answers any question arose. This mirror used to be exclusively for the Solomon Empire court. If it really was court exclusive, with Rhodes's personality, it would be a miracle if it dared to offend your queen. Speaking of which, in the fourth epic, would anyone actually be so bored as to ask a mirror such a question? At that time, the White Emperor also doted on our queen greatly. What is now Backland used to be a city belonging to our Sanguine. It was a wedding gift from His Majesty, the White Emperor, to our queen. By the time Emlyn said this, his nose was practically pointing to the sky. Chapter 233. It was all done by old Huang. Backland belonged to your Sanguine in the fourth epic. Fool, Klein didn't know about such a thing. This seemed to explain why there were still quite a few Sanguine in Backland now. It appeared that the Sanguine's status in the fourth epic was in no way inferior to, and perhaps even surpassed, that of the various royal families in the current fifth epic. Fool, Klein glanced at Emlyn. At this moment, he had changed from excitement to regret. Even with the gray fog's concealment, the shift in his emotions was clearly visible. It's just a pity that the Solomon Empire later suffered a drastic change. Although our Sanguine status in the Trentsust Empire remained undiminished, and we won the Four Emperors' War, the Four Emperors' War ultimately dealt a heavy blow to the Sanguine. The Queen fell, and Truncest's Knight Emperor fell. The four great noble families supported by the seven deities, Augustus, Einhorn, Sauron, and Castia, divided the empire. The Sanguine had no choice but to reluctantly give up their ruling position to preserve the Sanguine and ensure the continuation of their race. Fortunately, these fellows ultimately had reservations and didn't go too far. Emlyn finished speaking, sounding either regretful or fortunate. The seven deities were not united enough, and a new war was brewing, allowing the Sanguine to escape a disaster. However, without the support of a deity, the Sanguine could only watch Augustus and Castia, these transcendent families who were once inferior to them, bask in glory. Seven deities. I heard that in the early to mid-fourth epic, there was already talk of the seven deities. Klein leaned back in his chair, asking in a relaxed posture. Ah. Emlyn paused, then carefully chose his words. Mr. Fool, as far as I know, in the early to mid-fourth epic, the term seven deities was not widely recognized, because there were quite a few deities at that time. Quite a few deities. Klein's mouth twitched. He simply asked more directly. How much do you know about Hermit? Hermit was the orthodox deity of the North Continent in the fourth epic. Emlyn said without thinking. And what else? Fool, Klein pressed. And nothing else. His honorific name, you already know. Emlyn stammered a bit. He was actually a little embarrassed himself, but he also didn't know much more. Oh, and Hermit was an elf deity. He added a sentence. Ha ha. Klein no longer held any hope. For such a former orthodox deity of the North Continent, even the Sanguine, who once fared well in the North Continent, couldn't provide much information. Indeed, the divine name wasn't wrong. This Hermit was truly secretive, or perhaps low-key. Cough cough, Mr. Fool, if you are still interested in the history and glory of our Sanguine, I can also tell you about the life and deeds of the Blood Moon Queen, and the various honors of the Sanguine. Emlyn still seemed to have more to say. Fool, Klein rolled his eyes at Emlyn. This guy was an introverted youth in reality who loved puppets, and he showed no interest in history whatsoever. Enough, let's talk about it later. I prefer equivalent exchange. Fool felt that his spirituality shouldn't be wasted on such matters any longer. All right. Emlyn was a little regretful for a moment. The sense of accomplishment from being able to recount the Sanguine's history before such a great existence was undeniable, but unfortunately, he would have to wait for the next opportunity. This meeting ended just like that. Klein walked out of the washroom and arrived at a cheap coffee shop in the East Borough. After listening to the information provided by Old Kohler, Klein took out £2 and paid him. After remembering Angel's reminder last week, he additionally instructed Old Kohler to preferably not go out these days, as the air quality in Backland was terribly poor right now. Old Kohler nodded. He, of course, knew that the factories in the East Borough had been emitting pollutants wildly recently, and even the great detective in front of him planned to go south for a vacation to breathe some fresh air. Although he didn't have the money, he could return to his rented small house early, brew himself a cup of cheap tea, and enjoy the rare leisure time. Old Kohler took out a light blue mask from his pocket and put it on. Seeing his benefactor, Detective Moriarty, still dressed in his usual semi-high silk top hat and black cane, he was not stingy and took out another clean, unused mask from his pocket and handed it over. "Mr. Moriarty, this is what I received from the relief station earlier. It's brand new, I haven't used it before." Old Kohler spoke with some nervousness, worried that the gentleman in front of him would be disgusted. But in reality, this mask was indeed brand new. Although there were many masks in one pack, for Old Kohler, he always used the first mask and never bothered to replace or discard it. "Thank you for your kindness." Klein had no intention of refusing anyway. Even if he didn't use it, he at least couldn't make Old Kohler uncomfortable. Besides, this blue mask, no matter how he looked at it, gave him a sense of, made in China, déjà vu. Could this also be a design by Old Huang back then? "You received this for free at the relief station." Klein looked at the blue thin sheet in his hand, and the more he looked, the more it resembled a mass-produced item from his hometown. Yes, the relief stations opened by the night church are distributing these masks for free. Those who go early can usually get a pack, with about 10 pieces per pack. The pollution in Backland is getting worse and worse now, and these free masks make people feel a bit more at ease. I heard there's also a more advanced type of mask, something called 95. This one is more expensive, about 2 to 3 solidus per box. But it's said to be more effective and has the endorsement of the Steam Church, so many middle-class families have purchased this new type of mask. Old Kohler saw that the detective was interested, and then quickly told Klein the news he had heard. 95. N95. Klein strongly suppressed the urge for his mouth to twitch. He just knew why the things his neighbors were wearing recently looked somewhat familiar. Although he hadn't experienced the most severe 3 years, he still had some understanding of the basic types of masks, just not that sensitive. This style of not even changing the name, and still getting the endorsement of the Steam Church, couldn't it be that internal members of the Steam Church invented it through things or fragments of words left by Rosal? The mere manufacturing technology for high-grade masks should not be difficult for the Steam Church, which was full of artisans. Are there many newly built mask factories recently? Klein asked casually, looking at the blue thin sheet in his hand. Since they could be distributed for free to gain popularity, the output should not be low. Yes, in the East Borough, and also in south of the bridge, some new factories have been built. These factories have hired many new female workers and offer quite good benefits. It's said that the environment is also much better than other steel or chemical factories. Old Kohler spoke with some regret. Unfortunately, these factories preferred to recruit dexterous female workers. Fortunately, he could now also find some work through the Backland Comprehensive Services Company, and his life was more hopeful than before. Chapter 234, Tris Cheek. December 28, Tuesday afternoon. Red Rose Manor. Shaw Iyer, wearing an Innsmouth vest, sent Tris Cheek flying with a knee strike followed by a spinning kick. He glanced disdainfully at the demoness-shaped dent in the wall. What class! A mere demoness of pleasure trying to pick a fight with him, a dignified half-god level powerhouse. Do you think adding cheek to your title makes you a true cheek? You actually hit me. Tris clutched her aching lower abdomen, her mind clearing slightly, and looked at the cold-tempered man before her in disbelief. What was wrong with this person? She had just been planning to make a sacrifice. Even if she used to be a man, with such a delicate body, even women would be tempted, right? Long black hair, an oval face, foxy eyes, willow leaf eyebrows, long legs, a gentle and sweet demeanor, pure yet alluring. You actually greeted me with your foot. Tris's expression was somewhat twisted, and the ruthlessness of someone who had scraped by in the streets immediately surfaced. The grace of a demoness. Not quite. Shaw Iyer shook his head lightly. He raised his hand and grabbed, and Tris was suspended in midair. She clutched her neck in pain, her legs flailing weakly. Her 2 high heels had long since fallen to the floor, and her pearl-like toes, with a warm hue, curled up, pale blue veins clearly visible. HMPH. Shah-Ayar watched Triss struggle in agony. His spirituality was always quite high, and he was sensitive to death. He could make Triss experience the torment of hovering on the brink of death, struggling in pain every second, yet not truly dying. Only when the person he was holding was on the verge of dehydration, her light blue skirt soaked with cold sweat, almost losing control of some primal bodily functions, and beginning to roll her eyes, did Shah-Ayar release his hand. He watched Triss, her eyes hollow, collapse weakly to the ground. Perhaps your recent experience of wantonly provoking low-end nobles and receiving special attention from the witch church has made you forget your identity. For street thugs, when they encounter a weak and exploitable person, they exploit them without bottom line. When they encounter a formidable character they can't afford to offend, they don't hesitate to kneel and apologize, speaking and acting cautiously, observing others, and not making meaningless gestures. Shah-Ayar said as he walked over to Triss, who was still twitching. He continued speaking, not even glancing at the disheveled demoness on the ground. Didn't you do quite well just now? Even if unwilling, to escape the witch church's control, to gain a chance to flee this place early, you were willing to actively approach and tempt me. Now, after being taught a lesson, where does this courage come from to bare your fangs at me? Or is it that the inexplicable confidence accumulated from being a woman during this period has made you somewhat unclear about your potential positioning? He didn't deliver another kick, merely circled casually, then sat back down in his chair, poured himself a cup of black tea, and waited for the demoness on the ground to struggle and slowly get up. Although she had changed her skin, Shah-Ayar hadn't forgotten her true nature. Perhaps being a thug wasn't by choice, but didn't she truly feel joy and satisfaction when she caused a massacre at sea on the first ship? If he would hesitate and doubt himself when bullying Miss Sharon, then dealing with Triss was much simpler. After all, if their positions were reversed, Triss would definitely not show him any mercy, she might even torment him with malicious glee. Isn't this the kind of interaction she prefers? He thought it was acceptable enough. I'm sorry, I was wrong. The near-death experience just now made Triss clearly recall her past hardships and caution. At this moment, her gaze towards Shah-Ayar was filled with fear and reverence, with no trace of hatred or malice. Her voice was somewhat hoarse, and she forced herself to move slowly, using all four limbs, her body still trembling. She kept her head down the entire time, letting her long black hair cover her face, leaving only a wet trail on the floor. It seems you've recalled your past way of survival. Then get up. I have no interest in humiliating you for now. Shah-Ayar looked down. Triss was kneeling on the ground. Although she tried to calm her breathing, it still sounded somewhat heavy. She pushed aside her messy hair, revealing a somewhat pale but still refined face, and forced a fawning smile. Of course, he didn't want cheeks stained with snot or other disgusting things rubbing against his trousers. Fortunately, Triss was quite sensible at this point. She lightly caressed her chest and said with a slight apology. I overstepped earlier. Please wait a moment. I'll go clean up and then come back to serve you. Triss now realized that her current appearance would not get her any special treatment from Shah-Ayar. He had clearly seen many women and didn't think much of her. If she continued to be ignorant, her end would likely not be good. She lowered her head, half bent at the waist, and humbly retreated. Shah-Ayar didn't pay much attention to her. You treat people according to who they are, and the same goes for spiritual young girls. After Triss withdrew, Edsak politely knocked on the door and only entered after receiving permission. When he saw the human-shaped dent in the wall, his respect for his teacher deepened even further. Teacher, the smog accumulated in Backland has reached a critical point. Even without deliberate detonation, a disaster is inevitable. The witch church has already begun preparing to release the plague. Edsak reported the news from the witch church, a hint of helplessness and regret in his eyes. He was, after all, a prince whose heart wasn't hard enough. He truly didn't want something like the Great Smog to happen in Backland, but it seemed unavoidable. If they didn't seize this opportunity, even if the Augustus family was royalty, pushing for reforms in Loan would face immense resistance. One must know that the Loan kingdom had been founded for 1,000 years, and the church's power had been rooted in Loan for 1,000 years. Over these 1,000 years, the core members recruited by the church could not possibly all be royal family members. So, the families, relatives, and positions of the church's middle and high-ranking members in the Loan kingdom, could they be commoners? Vested interests exist everywhere, and the three churches cannot be anything but vested interests. Reform, even the royal family finds it difficult to take coercive measures against vested interests. There are simply too many things involved. At this time, Edsac's dissatisfaction with the nobles, wealthy merchants, and factory owners actually exceeded that with the witch church, because the witch church was, after all, invited by the Augustus family to cooperate. A sequence 3 Demonis's plague coverage was only about 15 kilometers, and a sequence 4 Demoness of Despair's influence was even smaller. Yet now, almost all of Backland was enveloped in smog. Who was truly to blame for this? For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.